Hello, welcome. My name is Melissa Newman. Thank you for being here. Today I want to talk about acceptance in relation to death and dying. So this comes from the perspective of the person who is dying and the level of acceptance that they will be seeking, and also from friends and family, and what acceptance looks like for them, and how acceptance whether it's reached in a reasonably healthy time frame or whether it's prolonged, which means then it can often prolong the person's own death and their dying process. So I want to share a little bit about what that looks like. I want to give actually an example, kind of a bit of a different example in relation to animals, because it was a recent experience of helping someone with their little dog and the family needing to come into a place of acceptance. I found that very interesting. So whilst death is imminent for the person dying, and it's a very challenging time because there's lots of emotions coming up for everybody and very uniquely to everybody as well. So what that looks like is fairly similar but different. In for example, if it was a husband and a wife, a long-term relationship, 50 odd years, maybe even longer, maybe not. The emotions of, like when that loved one is now about to leave this world, what does my life look like now? There's a lot of fear around security, a lot of fear around our foundations, basically, and security in the world. So much changes. So I can't kind of pinpoint it to one thing. But what I want to, I guess, highlight today is about when we're unable as loved ones, watching, witnessing, and realizing that someone very dear to us is about to transition. We can often prolong that death by not accepting or taking a long time within ourselves to accept that it's inevitable. And often that non-acceptance, or the length of time that we as witnesses, that length of time, isn't, it's not often very helpful. And I hope to explain why that might be and how that can look. So acceptance. So acceptance from the perspective of the person who is dying, for them, when they're facing death, it's very real and it's very, very up close in our face. And so it brings up all sorts of feelings for them with their emotions, and often the two being fear and regret. So the fear could be more related to fear of dying. That's a huge one. For many different reasons, so I'm not going to get into that today. And the regret that we haven't lived our life as fully as we'd hoped, because often, which I'll get to shortly, or I get off track. So then acceptance from the perspective of family and friends who are very close to this loved one that is transitioning now, all the sorts of feelings that they experience, but not limited to, is sadness, anticipation, maybe relief, especially if a person's had a long-term illness, the sense of relief that they'll finally be at peace. And also, in this particular example that I'm trying to bring forth, is acceptance. Often we are, I guess, reluctant or not. It just takes time. It takes time for us to reach a place of acceptance that this journey, this and this person's life is actually at its completion. That's a hard one to come to terms with for many different reasons, generally based on love, because we love this person. They're a huge value. They contribute a huge amount of value in our lives, and vice versa. So this is all that I want to talk about today, but yet it's important to again highlight, which I feel is important, is this is a natural cycle and part of life, just as is birth. And so with birth and death, knowing that if we come into this world, we all have, and from the moment actually we come into this world, we're already dying because our time is already ticking, if that makes sense. And so what I see so often in my work is that whilst we all know that death is imminent, for many of us, we kind of put it into the far distant future, that I don't need to worry about it now, I don't need to talk about it now, because that's like 80 years away maybe, or it might be 50 years away. However that looks, what we tend to not do is we kind of pretend that it's in this far distant future, but that's not always the case. And so we don't often talk about death because death actually has been deemed as an enemy. You can see how it's been portrayed in movies as something horrific that happens. It's portrayed in communications as, literally, I guess the easiest way I describe it is as the enemy, but it's not the enemy. I don't believe it's the enemy. And if we're fearing death, one thing I feel when we fear death, then that also prevents us from living life fully now. Because we might prevent ourselves from doing certain things and not living life fully. It might control us to the point that you don't fly in an aeroplane because you fear dying. But that then means that you don't get to experience other countries. And so from that perspective, that when we fear death, we actually alter how we live in the now moment based on our fears. And so we don't live life fully. And there could be a lot that we miss out on, which could relate to the regret. And so most people in my work, as I know and experience often, don't wish to talk about it. And so this is why I'm passionate to educate and reduce fears and improve the quality of people's lives, even for those who are dying. So even if we have a short amount of time being diagnosed with a terminal illness and so you've only got 3 months to live, well, are you going to live it fully? Yes, you might be dying, but are you going to live it fully? Or are you just going to allow it just to happen and be in a place of non-acceptance? Or do you make the most of your 3 months? Because you can. So if we're not willing to talk about it, a good question is why? Especially when if you think about how we plan and choose how we live in the world. For example, we set goals, we set New Year's resolutions, we strive, and there are people that don't as well. But what I can see some similarities is through those two approaches to life also kind of mirror how we choose to die as well. So we'll either plan for our dying and live life fully now, or we don't. And when we plan and prepare and live a life that's full and abundant and has been lots adventurous, then we're more prepared and accepting that, yes, I've had a good life, and it's almost, you're like, okay, apart from having to leave your loved ones, you're generally in a state of acceptance already. But if we live our life in the fear and we don't plan and we always cautious and we try to either control or not control, that's kind of almost a reflection of how we die as well, which creates a lot of overwhelm and stress. And so that period when we are transitioning, we're either going to be embracing that moment, even though like it can be stressing, especially if there's an illness, but it can also be a celebration as well, that we live in each moment, no matter what it looks like, to the fullest. And so whilst life and how we live life now can be a reflection of what a good death might look like, it's something I feel that we need to, that's important. I don't like the word need. It's important to reflect upon. So why is acceptance difficult? Well, generally, it's because of relationship conflicts and breakdowns, grudges, unforgiveness, our inability to want to resolve our differences, for whatever all of that might look like for each and every one of us. And then often we become estranged from family. And so the other part of that is regret, where we did not live the life that we were gifted. So when it comes to imminent death, these two experiences can prevent or prolong, one, the death, and the acceptance of. So in that moment then, when someone is dying, whether it's 3 weeks left to live or 1 year, we now, when we come into the awareness that a family member is dying, all of a sudden we try to make up lost time. And sometimes it can be too late. We might try to start to resolve our relationship breakdowns, and sometimes that people don't want to either. That's true as well. Some people don't want to see certain family members. That's very real. And that's okay. But we generally, all of a sudden, know that this person's not going to be here for long, and we try to make up lost time. But I don't understand, why do we not live in the now moment and embrace all of our relationships, the ones that are super close to us, the ones that we can. Some don't always. Some can't always be resolved, and that's okay. So why do we wait until that moment, and then we try to make up this lost time? We try to do everything in our power to maybe support the loved one, but we need to reflect why. Yes, there is a general love that we do that from, a space of love that we would do that, rightly so. But there are also underlying emotions that we also do that. We come from a place when we sort of are in that moment and experience. So why not Why not now? When life is good, when life is abundant, why not consider resolving those conflicts now so that we can live life fully now? Sorry, I just got something on my screen. So I want to give an example. This is a different kind of example. I didn't expect this. So a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to support someone with their little dog that had a terminal illness to help reduce the pain. So this family was quite overwhelmed, knowing that death was imminent. And so they were trying absolutely everything to prevent the pain, maybe even to prevent the disease within the animal's body, within its liver. And it was quite interesting. It was an interesting experience. So they actually were asking for my help. They didn't know that how that would look. They didn't know how that was going to look. And in my mind, the only way that I felt that I could support this family was I offered my Pranic Energy Healing. And I said to them, I can't guarantee any results, but I can at least aim to eliminate the pain, because that was their biggest concern. They didn't want their little dog to be in the amount of pain that it was or appeared to be in. And so I was willing to do that. And so I did actually do a Pranic Energy Healing session for this little dog. Now, this was a dog that apparently never lets anyone near it. It likes some cuddles from its owners, but will never sit longer than a few minutes. And then the dog doesn't actually like anyone near it, touching it, let alone be with the dog for half an hour, as I was. And I was able to actually release a lot of energy, dense energy, out of this little dog's body. And anyway, this did prolong its life for close to a week. Now, I didn't know what result would come from that, but I knew that it gave solace to the family. But what was really interesting was after I had done this treatment, in a meditation, I was in a meditation, and this little dog came to me, and it showed me a vision. And in this vision, I saw that the dog had crossed over. I actually thought it already crossed over when I had seen this vision. And I waited to hear from the family because I thought for sure they would let me know. And I hadn't heard from the family, and so I thought I would go check on them. So I popped in to see them, and then they had told me about their little dog, and yes, it did pass. It did cross over. Wasn't exactly the day that I thought, but I definitely saw that the dog was in a happy place. I saw the little dog, literally I felt the dog was actually giving me a big thank you for relieving the pain. But what was interesting was, I think the bigger thing that actually took place, as I learnt, was, as the family had expressed to me, was the healing that I did on this little dog. Yes, did reduce a lot of pain, but then when the family was able to see a few days, they got to spend 3 or 4 days with this dog in a reasonably good state of mind, and they were so at peace with that. They felt so relieved. But because this journey had been going already for a length of time, the dog actually then had a sudden turn of health and went down very quickly. And immediately what they said to me, because they then took it to the vet and allowed for the process for the dog to be taken care of so it could transition. And what they actually had told me was those few days allowed them to come into acceptance. They realized how much that the support that I'd given the dog, but then when they saw the complete change, they were actually at a place of acceptance. This was their word. They realized that everything that they were doing beforehand to prevent or prolong the death of this beautiful little animal, and rightly so, we all would do that. They weren't able to accept that this little beautiful little dog was not going to be here any longer. And I found that just so profound and very, very much mirrored us as humans, that we will do everything that we can to prolong life, even if it means that it's actually better for our loved ones to actually go. So we can prevent and prolong a death through treatment, and it does happen anyway, whereas pain is always managed. That's a huge part of the process. But pain management doesn't prolong death, but everything else does that we do to, maybe resuscitate a person if they're not breathing or what have you, all the other things that we do to bring the person back. And the question is, who are we doing that for? Are we considering the person who is dying and allowing them to go through the natural cycle of death, the process, and which I'm about to explain what it roughly looks like? Or are we prolonging it out of our own needs? And I know it's a sensitive topic, right? Because we love, it's love. We don't want something, a person, an animal that has been a valuable contribution in our lives to now no longer be here. I get it. I could almost say I prolonged my son's life, trying to care for him for the year that I cared for him, doing everything in my power to try to get solutions, find solutions to his to what was troubling him. So I get it. And this is what we do as humans, is we tend to try to control all outcomes. And yet this is one process. It is a very natural process. So I found that very interesting. And so what I was able to give to that family, though, through my visions, was I was able to bring solace to them, to let them know that their little dog is actually okay. Because when I shared with them my vision, what actually took place in a meditation, and that just popped in, this beautiful dog was running around me. It was jumping up and down, and then it ran off into the sunlight. So I was able to tell them from what I saw, whether it's real or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt anyone if that's what I saw, and if that brings solace to someone to ease their heartbreak. And so they were able to reach that place of acceptance. They realized that, yeah, they might have, out of their own need to keep the dog here, they realized, no, it's actually better that we let them go. So sometimes it's way better, especially for the person who is dying, to allow them to die naturally and go through all the process of all the stages of what that looks like. And yet most often, and actually what's really important is what also happens is the person who is dying often like to die alone, in the sense they will wait for their family members that might be around their bedside doing bedside vigils. When the family might all leave the room and go have dinner together, they often come back and find the person has gone. That's because often it's easier for the loved one to do it that way, so they don't have to, depending, because they'll know the energy of their family, they'll know how their family are either going to cope through that experience, because there's also times when only one family member will be present for some reason. A family member that might have went out to the dining table just had this urge, this inkling to come in and just check. And when they do that, they can sometimes see the last breath being taken. And there will be reasons for that. Sometimes those two individuals had maybe a stronger connection, or that individual is a stronger person emotionally and is able to share that with the rest of the family. There's many things that go on in that experience as to why that might happen. And so it's easier for the person who is dying to be able to transition when the family aren't actually there. And that's okay. So it's important for us to understand why we might be holding on and to be aware of what it is that we might be doing in those moments. Are we honoring the wishes of our loved one? Maybe they do just want to go now. So just coming into our own emotions to understand what's our motives behind maybe our different behaviors in that experience. Is it in the highest interest for our loved one, or is it more based on where we are, maybe emotionally? So acceptance is super important in that process. And it's important to recognize the dying process, but to celebrate it. So I just wanted to give and finish up on a few couple of things. So this process of dying, it's important for everybody to go with the flow. It's important to understand that so for the person dying, there can be a need to communicate, but there can also be a need for solitude where they don't want to communicate. That's hard to witness. They go through a process of surrendering attachment. They'll go through a process of complete withdrawal, which I'll try to elaborate a little bit more on in a minute. They go through the willingness to stop breathing, and then they go through the process to allow their heart to stop. So all these signs can be challenging to watch and witness with our loved ones. And it can look like when one begins, it can look like this. So when one begins to accept their mortality and realize that death is approaching, they may begin to withdraw from their surroundings. So they begin the process of separating from the world and those in it. So and what this looks like is they may decline visits from family members, their neighbours, and it's important for us to allow them to do that. And however that person is choosing to go through this process of separating from this world, allow them to do that however they wish. I get it. It's really hard to witness. So when they do accept visitors, it may be difficult for them to interact with certain people. It may be difficult for them to accept care and support. The person dying could be very angry even at times, because they're beginning to contemplate their life. They're revisiting their old memories. It could be bringing up, regret and all sorts of things. They're all the emotions that we process. They might be evaluating how they lived their life, and as I just said, sorting out the regrets, contemplating on the relationships they had, contemplating on how meaningful their life was. And then they also experience the reduced appetite, and this is a big one, because when family members, when the human is choosing in this process of separating and stepping away from this physical body, we actually don't need food and water. And it's a hard one for family members to accept, because we feel we need to feed them, we need to give them water. But if the body is actually shutting down, the body doesn't need food and water. That's part of the process. But these are all the hard things that we as loved ones have to witness. This is the stuff we are witnessing, and this is the stuff we need to accept. This process of dying. So it's normal for our loved ones who are dying to withdraw. They could be sleeping more, less engaged in activities. And the body does a wonderful thing. I'm just referring to my notes. During this time, because there's an altered body chemistry that takes place. Sometimes they can reach some sense of euphoria even. And doesn't matter, through all these experiences that they're separating from, there's actually no suffering in that process. If they've got a terminal illness, there is pain associated with that, yes. And that's where pain medication and stuff doesn't actually alter the process. It just actually allows them to be comfortable. So all these different processes, it's really important to understand what that looks like, because many of us don't actually know what that looks like. And so when we can understand through education and knowledge and information, which is what I feel I love to do, is to bring, and I'm going to bring more of these forward, is so that we can actually understand what that process looks like. So when it does come, we're actually more accepting for the journey. Doesn't mean it's not going to be a sad time, especially when it's connected to loving relationships, but it does make that process so much easier and more peaceful, from a place of acceptance, from a place knowing that it's a normal stage of life. And so celebrating a life lived well is like, I think that's the important part of the process, is to celebrate the life lived well with them whilst they still have the remaining days, hours, weeks, whatever that might look like. Why not celebrate a life lived well? So that's what I wanted to bring forth today, my little topic on acceptance, roughly what it looks like and how it can impact, good or bad, the process of dying. from the both perspectives. I hope you enjoyed this topic today. Next month, I'm thinking of talking about sort of trying to break through some fears about dying. I certainly want to bring that forth on my information sessions in community face-to-face. So I might bring that information then forward here on YouTube. So thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed. If you feel that this would be beneficial for maybe someone in your life who is going through this process, please share this video with them. And if you wish to support and like the information, give it a thumbs up. Appreciate it. Thank you. Namaste.